All right, that's a terrible visual. I'll just read it. So, hey, folks, welcome to another episode of Behind the Scenes of the Security Table, which is now transitioning into the Security Table. My name's Chris Romeo, joined by Izar Tarandash, Matt Coles, the Sultans of Security. I don't know. I'm always branding people. You guys know this. So
where's the Mark Knopfler riff?
Sorry, we didn't have the budget for that, but maybe if we get a sponsor someday, we can have like
I have a triangle here somewhere.
Yeah. Or maybe Brooke Schoenfeld will create us on his guitar. He'll create a riff for us.
That would be awesome.
Use.
Or our number one fan will use some AI to do it for us.
That's true. Okay, so the tasking has been sent out to everyone to find us a little riff that we can use here. But let me read the LinkedIn post. It's going to kind of set the stage for us and lead our discussion today. So this is Matt Johansson posted this on LinkedIn. And what this post says is the following, and I quote, "I really feel like a lot of security problems are actually developer experience problems. The more tools I put in my engineers' hands to do their job that are just secure by default, the less they figure out workarounds to introduce risk. I'm more successful the more I get out of their way and figure out ways to enable them to do what they need to do, but with guardrails. If you aren't already, find a champion with your DevEx org. It'll pay dividends." So we're talking about developer experience. We're talking about secure by default. We're talking about guardrails. So I want to give you guys the chance to set the stage or give us the first opinion here to get the conversation rolling. Matt, we always go to you, so we're going to do it again.
Well, so actually, I want you, if you could, to help. There's a few points. So there's a few points. I mean, luckily, Matt Johansson here constructed this post as individual sentences. So we can pick it apart one by one. Pick it apart. Sorry, didn't mean to say that. I meant to say analyze each point individually. But where does it come from? And I want to touch upon the secure by default statement first, because that's probably the more contentious out of all of them. So when I read that, more tools I put in my engineers' hands to do their job that are just secure by default, the less likely they figure out workarounds to introduce risk. So when I first read that, I was thinking, is the tool secure by default? Or is the tool producing guidance or results that are secure by default? So which do you think it is?
That's a good question. I mean, you could almost say it's both. If we're definitely not a textual analysis podcast here, where we analyze there was the word "the" at the beginning of the sentence. Did you not see that? That changes the entire meaning, Matt.
So I guess maybe the other piece here is, and there's another matter of interpretation. Izar?
But no, point of contention.
Oh.
We can't. Because the first sentence actually says that the problems that he tried to solve are actually developer experience problems. The result of the tool is not a developer experience problem per se.
It's the use of the tool?
Is.
It's the usage of the tool, yeah.
Well, so,
right?
and then I was thinking that there's maybe another interpretation of tool here. So, and again, so we need to bound our conversation, because otherwise we're going to go off in tangents and it's going to get ugly.
True.
Well, we're going to do that anyway. I mean, so we're going to do that anyway.
So do you think, because we don't know what Matt specifically was going for here, but is he talking about like SAST, or is he talking about production frameworks? So, for instance, are we talking about tools used during the development process, or are we talking about the tools that developers deploy to, which I think we would commonly call infrastructure or frameworks, right? Is that what he's referring to? Because I'm
going to say yes.
There's a very big difference there.
All of the above. So
D, all of the above. Okay.
What is developer experience in the modern world of technology? Developer experience tends to be a team that's responsible for the tooling that a group of developers / engineers use to build something.
We used to just call them tools teams.
Yeah, I mean, we used to call them tools teams back in the day, but they've gotten a fancier name now, and that's fine. Everybody has fancier names for things. But yes, classically, in the early 2000s, even 2010s, we referred to them as the tools team.
Yep.
right?
Or release engineering or something like that.
I mean, for me, release engineering was more of a team that was focused on getting builds out the door. They managed the pipelines, but developer experience was the tools team. They uploaded or they upgraded pieces of software that developers use to build the things that they build. And so that's what I think we're talking about here, though, is tools that the developers use to build something. And so when I think of this, I'm thinking with the IDE is in this category. I think all of the AppSec tools that people we've talked about ad nauseum on this podcast would fit into that category. CI/CD build related tools fit into that pipeline, right? All of these things are part of the developer experience. Anything the developer uses to build you stuff is part of the developer experience.
Yep.
Okay.
Great.
And that includes frameworks and SDKs and all that code stuff.
Yeah. Libraries, open source, software, things like that.
So I rate this a partially true.
Okay.
So I will contend that I could give every SAST, StarAst tool, whatever, SCA tool that is itself secure by default and have a piece of garbage outcome of a product.
Yes, but those are tools serving the dev. Those are not dev tools, right?
They should be dev tools, but I would say classically and even in the modern age right now, I don't consider a SAST tool to be a developer tool. It is a security tool that we make developers run. Sometimes
Okay, let's go a bit further into what he's saying. Okay. He says the more tools I put in my engineers' hands to do their job that are just secure by default, the less they figure out workarounds to introduce risk. Let's look at SAST.
SAST wouldn't really fit in that category, though.
Yeah, right.
Oh, so now I see. Now I would think that a SAST tool is something you give to developers, meaning they run SAST, they go into
to do their job. Developers don't need SAST to do their job.
No,
they need an
and
IDE.
They are the first ones to say that.
Well, hold on. If you do SAST, if developers are going to write secure code, right, you're going to run it through a tool and do triage.
That's
of the
them
results.
doing our job.
Of course, that's good process, but that's not. So what are I take a developer, first day on the job, I sit them down, I say, here's your laptop, you only have a SAST tool. They can do nothing. They cannot be productive. They cannot do anything in their job. They will quit 2 days later because they're like, all you gave me was this SAST tool and you locked on my laptop, so I couldn't even load an IDE or any of the things I needed to build software. So that's why I'm saying
developer tool.
No, but that's not where I see the problem. It's not the fact that it's the only tool that I have, and that proves that it's not a developer tool. To me, it's not a developer tool because a developer can achieve their objectives with or without the SAST. With the SAST, they are going to achieve better objectives from our security point of view, right?
It's a supporting tool.
That to me makes it a security supporting tool.
Yeah, it's a supporting tool or technology, but it's not core to the developer
not
doing
only
their
that,
job.
Not only that, but in that class of tools, there isn't anything that a developer can do to end with a less. No, there is. They can change config and stuff like that. But that's not going to lead them, apart from perhaps creating less tickets or whatever, or alerts or whatever, it's not lead them to their outcome, which is, at the end of the day, better code. Perhaps if you have a tool that's very aggressive in the CI/CD and it kills the build, and they can shut the tool down, then okay, that lets them achieve their objective of putting code out in a less secure manner because the tool had bad defaults. But what I read in this line here is exactly what we spoke about, I think, last week and the week before and the week before that. Give them a library, give them an ORM. If they think that they need to, they will find ways around that goodness of the ORM to write their raw queries and introduce injection. So that's what I think is going that if we start giving them the things that we're talking about with the guardrails and libraries that work by default in a secure manner, if those things are too in their faces, if those things are too restrictive, they are going to be an incentive for them to find smart ways around the controls that we put in place. So the whole thing defeats the objective. When you, as Matt says, find a champion with the DevEx org, you are bringing in somebody who can be the voice of balance in, okay, you want this to be secure, but the developers want it to be flexible. Here's the middle term where everybody can live happily.
I think you have to declare a moment in time where you're making this shift from developer tools that are giving developers all the freedom to developer tools that are secure by default.
Yes.
I think today, I don't think we are there yet. I think
No.
Matt is describing a future state that we should aim for, that he says he's trying. The more tools I put in my engineers' hands, he's iterating on his process of how he's working with developers. I don't think we are there yet, but I think there are things that we can do, for example, with the IDE to make the decisions that the developers are making influenced or constrained by the guardrails, but also directed into a secure by default stance.
So let's take the IDE. One popular example today is Visual Code. Almost everybody is using it one way or another. Extremely powerful thing, like almost as powerful as Emacs, right? But the thing is that you bring it up. The first thing that you get is there in the corner, restricted mode enabled or restricted mode flashing or whatever. And what that means is that it's not going to interpret a lot of code, both local and external, that you could be importing as modules, stuff like that. The second thing that happens is the developer turns that off. It says, trust the code in here because it's me writing, I'm great, trust it, or whatever, right?
That's served us so well throughout our history.
True, but everybody feels good because there was a security by default thing there in place.
Well, you can't, secure by default can't be loosened.
Wait. I'm not in the whole scenario. So they turned it off. Cool. Everybody continues doing their thing, write their code, whatever. Now they go and they find a plugin that they need to bring in. That plugin could come from a central repository with Microsoft. It could be some repository on GitHub, whatever. It comes in, they start using it. Nobody knows what that thing actually does, right? So my point in here is you have this tool, developers need it, it's the experience that they choose, they build the experience by importing modules and functionality, and security has absolutely no control or nice way of control or visibility into what these guys are bringing. So the approach up to now has been that security takes a step back and says, we are going to create a local repository with things that we've vetted beforehand and we know where they come. And we expect everybody to only pull modules and functionality from that repository that's vetted. Would we call this secure by default?
Could be. And to follow up on that, so thank you for realigning my expectation here. But now I want to ask a clarifying question along that lines. When we talk about secure by default, and we talk about risk to who or what? Are we protecting the end system, or are we and the customers, or are we protecting the business that's creating it? Because what you're describing, using vetted, validated components within an IDE, as a developer plugin, is a business risk problem, not a customer solution problem.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, this is a great question, Matt, because I've been thinking about this over the last couple of weeks. At the end of the day, for me, every issue is a customer issue.
If you're
because if my build infrastructure gets broken, ultimately the biggest thing that scares me is that my customer's data gets disclosed. I don't care how it happened. So everything for me funnels towards customer data disclosure.
Or if it interrupts your service.
Or denial of service or whatever, right? So
and
that's
again,
why I don't separate business.
Yeah, and it makes sense if you're in there. So we talked about this a couple of weeks ago with product versus service provider, right?
Yeah.
And whether that's business service provider or cloud application service provider, right? Where your infrastructure is where your customer data lives versus and your service resides and your business model is based on, as opposed to like like product development, where if the CI/CD pipeline goes down and you can't ship a product, on day one, well, if it comes up on day two, oh, okay, so you delay a day. It may be bad, but it may not be catastrophic to your end customers, right? So the risk level is different, but we're still talking about business risk, and I agree. There's a transitive effect there to customers when you're talking about your business is up as a service provider.
Yeah, because without customers, we don't have a business.
That's right.
So we can measure all the business risk we want. If the customers are gone, we're just twiddling our thumbs, wasting our time.
So secure by default, I will argue that secure by default is not the only metric here, and unless we further define what secure by default is, right? So secure by default is securely configured, right, and in theory patched for vulnerabilities, right, for known vulnerabilities.
Wait, hold on. Throwing a flag thrown on the play.
Okay.
Yeah.
Secure. I did that on purpose.
What does patching have to do with? You got the intended result. What does patching have to do with secure by default?
Okay, so look, secure by default is at least secure configuration, right? And you do secure configuration because you want to prevent somebody from having an exposure of something that can be bad, right? So you don't configure HTTP because you don't want data in transit you want data in transit to be secure, so you use HTTPS only. You authenticate with strong credentials because you don't want to have a bypass of that authentication. You have strong RBAC in place, right, as a configuration option because you want strong access controls. So if you don't patch as part of that secure by default process, you're leaving exposures potentially, especially if those are attack surface type vulnerabilities.
I think we got to break secure by default into, I want to segment it. So I think secure by default, I think design decisions. We have a number of loaded design decisions up front that if we do not do or do not enact will result in a crappy product whenever we get to production. Now there are supporting operational processes that are part of calling something secure by default. You can't tell me it's secure by default if you don't have a patching process. Oh, well, we can't, we don't, there's no upgrade. Well, then you're not secure by default if there's no upgrade path, if you're not triaging vulnerabilities to that product and releasing new versions, hopefully in an automated way that I don't even have to think about or worry about. Like the coolest thing I've seen in the last number of years is like software patches from products I've purchased that just happen, just magically. And then sometimes they tell me, sometimes they don't, right? So, but big picture for me, we have secure by default design decisions. We have operational things that are supporting that have to be there for something to be secure by default, but they're not secure by default. You can't say, well, because I patch, I'm secure by default. That doesn't add up.
Sure. I want to touch upon something since you just brought it up. If you have an automated patching process in your tool that you've given to developers as a developer tool, and you can push patches that potentially have functionality side effects, have you broken developer experience?
What do you mean by patching? What patching? Auto patching, like the end product that we send to customers, or auto patching my IDE, or what? I'm not clear.
Auto patching the IDE.
Auto patching the IDE.
So we know that patches that come out for things can include functional side effects, deprecation of APIs, deprecation of functions, removal of functions, change of behavior of functions.
But I mean, that's why you have a developer experience team, though, that they don't just let Visual Studio Code updates flow to everybody whenever Microsoft posts them.
So just
a good
having
tools team has a triage process to ensure that they aren't breaking the whole world.
So then having a secure by default tool is not sufficient.
No, Matt, wait.
Well, I never said it was the only thing. I never said it had to be the only thing. I'm not saying you don't have other things that support it. It's not standalone by any stretch. Sorry, Izar, go ahead.
No, wait. Developer experience. I need to understand this better. To me, if you have a Porsche or if you have a bicycle, both are able to take you from point A to point B. You're probably going to enjoy the ride much more in the Porsche. Developer experience, same thing for me. Visual Code or VI, both are going to enable you to write code. you're probably going to enjoy the experience much more in Visual Code, because it's going to do a lot more for you. To my probably mistaken eyes, that defines developer experience. We are giving our developers the best environment where they can flourish and be innovative and be everything, and we are whispering in the back, and be secure, right? And I to Matt's point.
Which Matt?
If you the last one that I think you made, if you patch that tool, that the developer experience tool, and it takes a bit out of the developer experience, the developers will still be able to write code, just not with all the functionality that they are used or demanding. So they will come with the pitchforks to the door of security, but it's not going to stop the company from functioning.
And we've gotten hyper focused on the IDE versus focusing in on what the developer is actually building. We want the tool to be secure by default in such a way that it drives the developer to the right decision and takes away any crappy decisions. Somebody
goes to the library for me.
Somebody adding a feature that enables the HTTP protocol in this day and age should not be allowed to happen. That should be prevented somewhere, whether it's the IDE putting a little buzzer and going, sorry, wrong answer, you cannot do that. Whether it's the check-in process at GitHub, GitLab, whatever you're using, having some rules of engagement that say you can't do that. But somewhere we need the developer experience to catch that problem. And right now, the challenge, this is all crystallizing for me now, the challenge we've had as an industry is that we've pushed all of that stuff off to these other tools. We've pushed the responsibility to SAST and the other one that starts with D and many other tools that exist out there versus bringing it back into the developer's workflow.
So that's where the guardrails come in place, right? I mean, if I start bringing that into the developer workflow, basically what I'm doing is, I can't believe I'm saying this, I'm shifting left. I'm taking those tools. I'm taking those tools.
Wrong answer.
Right? And bringing it into the developer's desktop, which for some reason, some people thought that it was a really good idea. But the thing is that you're just transferring things. You're moving things from one place to another. You're not really changing the way they're done, changing the expectations, or changing the responsibilities. You're just giving more shitty work to the developer, and you're making that thing that they use to why people need Macs with 64 gigs memory. Is it for running AI models? No, it's for running Visual Studio. It's becoming ridiculous, right? And we want to pile even more on that. So I don't know. I think that these are very separate things that connect in that word experience. So the last line of Matt's post, what was it?
Have a champion.
Help me here, guys. Yeah. If you aren't already, find a champion with your DevEx org. It will pay dividends. So now we want to go to DevEx and explain security to them and get a champion that, and everybody knows what I think about champions. And again, transfer the responsibility. Do your work the way that suits me. Do your DevEx thing the way that I think it should be because it's secure.
But we've argued this point around the security table a dozen times at least about who's ultimately responsible for security and where do you get the results. You can't get the results from you because there's not enough of you.
No, you can't. You're totally right. But even if I transfer the responsibility to a developer, the final outcome is still my responsibility because I decide what responsibility I'm transferring to them. Right? So at the end of the day, it becomes two extremes. Actually, two extremes in the middle. You have security in here defining the requirements. You have the developer in the middle actually doing the work. And then you have security at the end verifying that the work was done. I don't think that any of these three pieces in here is going to be better served by introducing dev experience in the mix. I mean, I love the idea of security by design. I love the idea of tools that provide security by design. I'm still not very close on what's a tool that's secure by design. I think that we need to ask Matt actually what he means here.
Yeah.
And just a plug-in, Matt has a great newsletter called Vulnerable U. No, Vulnerable U. And it's really cool. So,
sorry, secure by default was the statement that Matt Johansson said, not secure by design. That's important. Yeah. It's important. Secure by design versus secure by default are two different things.
It's a default.
Yeah.
Completely
and
different
what I've
thing.
figured out as I've continued to study these things is everybody thinks they know what that means, and nobody freaking knows what it means or how to do it, which is hilarious.
I know
because
I don't.
But most people are throwing it around now because of CISA's document and everything. And I'm like, I'm starting to unpack that for some research I'm doing. And I'm like, nobody knows what this means. And there is no defined definition of how to do it.
You know what? Secure by default?
We tackled this
secure
before.
by default is easier than secure by design to wrap your brain around.
Secure by default to me, and I know that nobody asked, but to me, it means that once upon a time I worked in a place that was very forceful about publishing hardening guides. Every product goes out with a hardening guide. To me, that means the product is going out by default open, and it's on the customer's side to apply these hardening guides to close it. Secure by default to me means it leaves the door closed. It goes out of the door closed.
We had this argument, this discussion about loosening guides. Remember, that's the new term that CISA wants to use. Boo, yeah, exactly. So because releasing with a guide it implies that it was open when it left the factory, but it should be hardened, and that's why we give hardening guides.
Yeah.
But loosening is not the right. I think we've had this conversation that loosening is not necessarily the right thing. It's a secure deployment guide that gives you options for deployment, but it should be by default one of those secure options.
So
right?
So we go right to the heart of the thing in this dev experience discussion. If we do something that's completely closed, like the IDE or the libraries or whatever, and we say we are not giving you guys a loosening guide because that's a bad thing, I think that's what Matt means when he says they are going to find ways around. So if you don't give the losing opportunities, they will find them, and you won't have control over them because you believe that everything is by default secure.
But you have to make it easier for them to use the new tooling and the new guidance that you're enforcing in the tooling than if they had to go do it themselves. So you can't make it harder, so they have to try to sneak around it. You have to enable them with this and think of it as a positive instead of a negative.
So Matt said, though, it's my job as a security person, or his job as a security person, to give developers tools that are secure by default so that they don't have to find workarounds. And what Izar was saying, and I agree with him, is if you give a locked down, the reason why I don't recommend hardening an operating system before you give it to a developer is because they're going to have to unharden it to do their job. And so if you give a secure by default component, and let's talk about frameworks and components more so than business tools, although the IDE is probably a good example of a business tool, developer tool, that if you give it in a secure by default state and it doesn't work the way the developer needs it to work, they're going to have to find workarounds. And that contradicts Matt's argument that if I give a secure by default tool, developers will be happy and can do their job.
We've gotten hyper focused on the IDE, but this is not talking about hardening a IDE environment. And it's the decisions that are coming and being implemented in the IDE are the things that measure this. It's secure by defaultness, making that word up.
No, I think it's talking about giving to the developers something that's already closed from the shop. It comes to them closed. This is what you're going to use to work.
Right. And you can't because so let's go with the line of the thread that you were just suggesting there. So if you're talking about what gets built in the IDE, and you give, so first off, you're not going to give pre-hardened code, right? You're not going to give secure by default code because that's the developer's job.
No, yes, you will.
Components.
Libraries,
I don't think it's the code
components,
that we're
libraries,
talking about
third
here.
party.
I mean, I don't think that secure by default IDE means that it only allows secure code. But let's talk about, let's use an open source example. Okay. So if I want to add a component to my project, should I, as a developer inside of a big company, be able to go scour the internet and find any package I want and load it into via my IDE? I say no. I don't. In a large engineering, a startup is a different thing. Startup is you got to have that ability to move and shake and do things differently. But in a established engineering organization, I do not want packages being added from someplace where we have no idea how trustworthy they are. They could have been backdoored. They could be malware. And so I want the IDE to prevent somebody from adding that package that hasn't been vetted into a given project.
We spoke about that with the Visual Code example, right? Yeah. Are you going to get it from a repository, or are you going to go everywhere?
Right. As long as there's guardrails for innovation, that's fine, right? So
there's got to be a process where you can say, Matt, hey, but I found this cool library. It's not on the list. Somebody's got to review it, and we got to get this into our product because it's great.
Exactly.
So that's fine because we don't just have random software being added into our software, and we wonder why our build systems got hacked or some other type of challenge that came as a result of an open source component that was breached.
Right. So from experience, there will be those draconian places, and by the way, this happens with Chrome extensions as well. No, here's the list of the ones that you can use, and whatever else, shut up. We don't want to hear about it. Mm-hmm. There will be those that will say, here's a set of procedures and tools that you can use to make sure that your risk is as little as possible. And after you run your proposed extension or whatever through this, then we are sort of okay with you using it. And there are those places that say, do whatever you want, right? But let's bring that let's get out of the IDE for a second. Another thing that we all love and love to hate, Java. There is that file, that java.whatever.sc.whatever, that I forget the name, where you can define which ciphers are available in the crypto extensions of Java. If there was a way to enforce that every single developer would use only that version of that file, don't believe there is, but if there was, would we say that this is an example of a developer tool that's secure by default, and that there might be some cases where a developer could come and say, I can't work with these ciphers, I need something else?
I don't think it's a developer tool.
Compiler is not a developer tool?
The configuration of it's not your compiler. It's a configuration of your runtime, I believe. It doesn't affect the compiler.
Right. You're right.
Once again, it's a design decision, right? We're back to that. That's a design decision. What crypto algorithms you allow to be included in a project. Now,
but you are guardrailing it. You're guardrailing it by only giving the known good options for that design decision.
Yeah, because flip it around the other way. Do you want a developer to be able to add DES into that configuration file and start using DES encryption, which we all know isn't even encryption? We can barely call it encryption at this point because it can be cracked.
Triple DES with distinct keys is at least something.
Yeah, but that's not DES. Yeah, triple DES. Yes. Now you said triple DES, which is a different algorithm. Yes, it's using the same same
but that's
base.
Not a flip. That's not a flip. That's the continuation of the scenario.
Well, so then by extension, are we bringing specifications, whether that's coding conventions or in this case a crypto specification, into the fold of secure by default and/or by developer tools? So, as an example, if we set a standard for what crypto algorithms to be used or can be used or cannot be used, we will end up with things that are secure by default. Well, secure by design, potentially secure by default. Yeah. But that's a standard. That's a specification. That is not a tool, and
Which
it's not
is
a developer
part of the
experience.
DevEx, but it's not a tool. Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's not really developer
bring it back
experience, is
in.
it?
I mean, that's certainly everything you just described is right on. That is part of secure by design, potentially secure by default. But let's bring it back to this conversation and say, do you want the technology that your developers use to enforce that for you? Because that would make the technology that the IDE they're using secure by default. If they go to, or maybe it's when they go to check in the code, like we can also push it out of the IDE into the code, source code control system. I like that a little bit. I like that a little bit less because now we're letting them waste time on something that's never going to get approved. And they may spend 3 days implementing something and they go to check it in and the thing says, no way, you can't use DES encryption. What are you doing? Right. Whereas if it's in the IDE and we're able to enforce that and say, hey, this is something we don't do. We don't allow DES encryption anymore because it's not 1964.
Or it's part of the SAST, or it's identified by the SAST tool.
So here's another take. What if we found a way to do all this securing by default that he's proposing in those tools? Would it be fair to say that going on an 80-20 arbitrary divide, 80% of the developers don't care enough or don't reach the level that they have to disagree with the defaults of the tools that they are using? They just want to get code out of the door. Mm-hmm. And the 20% that do disagree are hopefully going to engage in a dialogue with security around those defaults because they understand that they are breaking the defaults. So could we say that if we go the way that he's proposing, by closing things as part of developer experience, what you get at the end of the experience is that either you're going to have things that are secure by default, 80% of the cases, and 20% of the cases, people are going to come and talk to security and actually have a dialogue around those defaults and perhaps figure out that, hey, we need different defaults, or hey, we need a different way of doing this kind of thing, right? So could it be that what he's proposing, rather than leading to a more secure and beautiful future, actually leads to a higher level of dialogue between security and developers through developer experience? Does that make any kind of sense?
Yeah. I think the connection, once again, we've all, I think, agree on this point that part of being a good security person is understanding the plight of the other functions across the business, from developer experience to product to engineering to the best way that we support them is when we walk a mile in their shoes and understand what they're going through. So I mean, I think you're going in the right direction here about this is going to create more dialogues if you. So that comes back once again to the exception process. The secure by default tool cannot be draconian in that it's locked down and there is no, sorry, we don't allow that. It has to have an exception process where you can have a request sent to Matt as our security engineer, and he can review it and go, okay, I can't find any reasonable reason why you'd want to use DES encryption in this thing. Make your argument, give them the opportunity, but it could be something a lot more. It's okay. Here's an even better example. The engineer, you have a really engineer who knows crypto, and they say, well, I want to use some of this new quantum crypto in our product, which is potentially or quantum safe algorithms or something like that. They want to use something that's actually potentially a higher level of security than what your minimum standard or your maximum standard kind of prescribes. Then Matt could have a dialogue about, well, we don't think quantum safe algorithms. We're not that afraid of quantum computers yet, but thanks for looking into that. And we're going to be chasing that in our minimum standard for the future. And we'll definitely make a note to circle back with you because it looks like you got some really strong opinions about it.
So,
and by the way, are you using a memory safe language?
I would disagree. I would actually disagree. I think I might disagree with that just a little bit.
Please.
Security should be consulted, I think, in that case, because there's value in that conversation. But you don't want to, if a product wants to go beyond and innovate because maybe they have pressures coming from their customers, right? Then we should be supportive of that within reason. I that's the setting the guardrails, not the exception process. Because what we're talking about here is making a choice that goes above and beyond the minimums.
Yeah.
And you should never set a maximum, right? Security should never say, well, you should at least use AES 128, but you can't use anything more than AES 256.
But what if they want to use a different algorithm?
No, that's not true. That's not true. Well, what if you have a performance problem? And if you go too high, that's going to bring things down.
Problem,
there is such a thing as
problem.
too much security. But security could be influencing that performance problem. What I'm saying is there is such a thing as too much security for any given case.
There is such a thing as reasonable security too.
There should be.
But reasonable security does not preclude the ability to go above and beyond, right? Because a development team may decide they want more than what's reasonable.
That's future proofing. What today is reasonable, tomorrow could be the minimum.
Right.
Yes.
Like RSA going RSA 4096 on a key length as opposed to RSA 2048, which is the current
right. But if you tell people
guidance.
You always have to use 4096, anybody writing for this thing is going to come and say, I can't do that.
Yeah. That's right. Developers will find ways around if those are too stringent guidelines.
Yep.
But that's not secure by default. That is guidelines.
Yes.
Or specifications, right? Guardrails. The choice of tools in the post originally is where I think we're getting hung up on. The definition of what a tool is, developer tool specifically, versus the things that developers use, that they configure, that they build, that they produce. Those are the things that we're talking about more broadly.
I think that the verdict here is that we have to invite him to explain himself.
It took us 42 minutes to get to the point where we decided we should have just had the author of this post here so he could just tell us what he meant.
Yeah, I don't think we quite grasped what he was going for. But
I mean, I think we went on a good journey, though.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of discussion points here, and maybe he didn't intend, maybe he wasn't thinking in any of these areas, but from a secured by design, secured by default standpoint, you kind of have to.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end our discussion for today about this developer experience, secure by default, guardrails, and DevEx champions. I feel like we made a little bit of progress. I don't know if I could measure how much, but I think we made a little bit of progress forward, at least in our own understanding. We had to crystallize some points to make this whole thing work. So, folks, thanks for listening again to the Security Table, and stay tuned for another episode real soon.